Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone is safe and well at this difficult time. For those who don't know me, my name is Joey P. Murray, and for the last 3 years I have had the pleasure of being a music minister in the parish of St. Martin de Porres in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, with the distinct privilege of serving as co-director for the Office of Sacred Music Ministry alongside my other co-director, Miss Joan Delahunt, for the past year or so. I was asked by our pastor, Father Alonzo Cox, and our parochial vicar, Father Daniel Kingsley, to do, hopefully, a brief video talking about one of our upcoming liturgies, specifically our deciding to perform excerpts from the Office of the Dead, which is a part of the Liturgy of the Hours. Now, for some of you, the Liturgy of the Hours is very familiar and it's a part of your prayer life as a practicing Catholic, but I gather that for a good handful of you, you've probably just heard the term for the first time, and that's why I'm here. Oh, and in case you're wondering why I'm looking off to my left, it's because I do have some notes here. I wanted to make sure I got this right, so I apologize in advance and thank you in advance for bearing with me. The Liturgy of the Hours, also known as the Divine Office, is actually one of the oldest forms of Christian prayer. And it takes from the Jewish tradition of the recitation of psalms during different points of the day, with the psalms corresponding with that time of day. So very broadly speaking, there are various sources for the origins of what has become the Liturgy of the Hours, and that's, if for nothing else, just because there were different branches of Christianity that were practicing things like this at the time of what's now known as the early church. But if you were looking for a solid origin story that had a year attached to it, one year that you could probably look at is 313. Why 313? Because the emperors Constantine and Licinius of the Roman Empire at that time, in that year, issued what is now known as the Edict of Milan. And what that edict said was that, unlike previous emperors who had violently persecuted Christians for practicing their faith, they had decided that Christians could now openly practice their faith in their houses of worship without fear of violence or persecution from the state. Of course, as you can imagine, what immediately followed was the faithful being so happy about this that they began to gather in the morning and in the evening in their places of worship to pray. Not long after this edict, the leaders of the church implemented a series of guidelines for clergy called the Apostolic Constitutions. They were created to help clergy successfully and faithfully execute the tenets of their vocation. Fast forward again to the early 6th century, and we are introduced to a guy by the name of Benedict to become Saint Benedict of Nursia, or Norcia. I'm terrible with pronunciations. It's a region in Umbria in Italy. Benedict is a very religious and very devout monk, and he establishes the Benedictine order of monks during his ministry. Among his various other accomplishments, in the year 516, he completes a series of over 70 short chapters in a collection known as The Rule of Saint Benedict. Or when he was writing it, it was just the rule because he didn't know he was going to become a saint. He was just writing something and it was just the rule. The Rule of Saint Benedict explains how monks, and then over time, by extension, other religious, clergy, and in fact how other lay faithful should be practicing their religion. It became so popular and so widespread that various Christian denominations still use the Rule of Saint Benedict as a standard and reference for right Christian living. Now, how does that tie into what we're talking about as far as the Liturgy of the Hours? Well, Saint Benedict thought that the 24 hours that exist in a day should be divided up into 3 parts. Benedict felt that for a monk, 8 hours of their life should be devoted to work, 8 hours should be devoted to prayer, and 8 hours should be devoted to sleep. What this eventually led to in the church was what we now know as the canonical hours, which are 8 specific periods during the day when clergy, religious, and lay faithful, if they so choose, should be performing a specific kind of prayer. Depending on the time of day and depending on the season, that prayer should, could, would include readings from the Old and New Testament, psalms, hymns, and the writings of the early patriarchs of the church. Those 8 original times were known as Matins, Lauds, Prime, Terce, Sext, None, Vespers or evening prayer, and Compline or night prayer. This is where the fun sleep thing comes in. Matins happens at 2 a.m. Yeah. So if you were somebody who got to bed at 7 o'clock, and it didn't matter if you got to bed at 10 o'clock, at around 2 in the morning, you were supposed to, as a monk, get up at 2 a.m. and pray. Totally fun. Fast forwarding again through tons of time, centuries and generations of Christendom, all the way to the 1960s and the Second Vatican Council, where, among all the other major reforms to the administrative and liturgical aspects of the Roman Catholic Church, the Liturgy of the Hours is affected as well. One of the most significant things being that Prime, which is a divine office that's prayed at around 6 a.m., depending on where you are, is eliminated, or what they call suppressed. The second thing that happens is Pope Paul VI decides to divvy up these specific times of day into major and minor hours. Major hours that are temporal and are still required to be prayed by the clergy and the religious are morning prayer and evening prayer, Lauds and Vespers. The divine office that's considered non-temporal is the office of readings, which was formerly known as Matins. Yeah, the 2 a.m. prayer that was happening, yeah, they decided it's alright, get some sleep, or something like that. I wasn't there. Conventional tradition suggests, if not insists, that the office of readings, since it's not relegated to a specific time of day, can be done in conjunction with one of the major hours. And it's a lot of fun because it's complex and there's just lots of great stuff in there. As we all know, several weeks ago, Bishop DiMarzio decided to suspend public mass and lift the obligation to attend liturgy. And this was done at the beginning of the outbreak of COVID-19 to protect the health and safety of the general public and, of course, the faithful who exist in our diocese. The unfortunate side effect of having to do that is that during this time, Catholics in Brooklyn and Queens cannot gather in large numbers to celebrate a funeral mass or a memorial mass in remembrance of a loved one. It was after several discussions with Father Cox and Father Kingsley that we agreed that one way to be able to remember our dead, specifically those who have lost their lives to coronavirus, is to perform this particular liturgy so that we have some way of honoring our dead and finding a way to pray for them and pray with them at this time. To make our use of the Office of the Dead a little bit more meaningful, we will be interpolating portions of the Requiem Mass, that is, the traditional Mass of the Dead from the extraordinary form from the liturgy, including the sung sequence Dies Irae. For those who don't know, the Dies Irae is one of the oldest and arguably one of the most beautiful chants of the Church, used in the Mass of the Dead, and it speaks about the Day of Judgment and appeals to God for mercy on the faithful departed. With the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, the Dies Irae was relegated, coincidentally, to the Liturgy of the Hours. It was broken up into 3 sections, and those 3 sections should be prayed during the course of the day for a particular divine office. We will start with the first section of the Dies Irae. We will go into the Office of Readings, which will include a sung version of Psalm 95. We'll then go into an opening hymn. There will be an intoned version of Psalm 40 and 42. There will be a New Testament reading, and then there will be an excerpt from the writings of the patriarchs of the Roman Catholic Church. The transition between the Office of Readings and evening prayer will be the second section of the Dies Irae. For evening vespers of the Office of the Dead, we will recite Psalm 121, Psalm 130. There will be a joyful recitation of a canticle, which is an excerpt from the letter of St. Paul to the Philippians. We will then go into a reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. That will be followed by a sung canticle of Mary, also known as the Magnificat, and that will be followed by general intercessions, where we will speak the names of the faithful departed who have lost their lives to COVID-19. Following general intercessions, there will be a sung Our Father, and we will conclude with the third and final portion of the Dies Irae. Last tidbit. In keeping with the solemn nature of performing this divine office, please know that there will be no preaching on Tuesday evening. Rather, Father Cox and Father Kingsley encourage you to use this liturgy as a time to pray and reflect on your departed loved ones, and hopefully take away from it some peace and consolation in what we all know to be a very difficult time. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about what we will be doing on Tuesday evening, you are most welcome to email Father Kingsley at dkingsley at smdpp.org, and he'll take care of that for you. Otherwise, be sure to tune in via Facebook on Tuesday, April 28th, beginning at 7 p.m. for excerpts from the Office of the Dead, which will include the Office of Readings, Vespers, and portions of the Sung Dies Irae. Stay safe and well. Take care.